For our next example, we're going to be breaking down 1 and 57 hundredths, and we're going to be rounding it to the nearest tenths. So let's look at 1 and 57 hundredths, and let's place it into our place value chart as we name it in unit form. So I start with 1, 1, 5 tenths, and 7 hundredths. You should place that in your place value chart as well. So I'm going to decompose 1 and 57 hundredths, and I'm going to try to use the greatest number of tenths that I can. So what I'm going to do is I know that a 1 is made up of 10 tenths. And if I had 10 tenths here, I could bundle it together, move it forward, and that would give me 1 1. So I can also unbundle that 1 1. So when I unbundle that 1 1, that gives me 10 tenths. And I also have this 5 tenths, so adding up 10 tenths and 5 tenths would give you 15 tenths. Now we can't forget about our 7 hundredths because it is still there as well. So when I'm decomposing these numbers, you can think of it as just moving these digits backwards at place value and making the greatest number of tenths that you can. So now let's do the same thing with hundredths. Go ahead and pause this video and try to decompose this number using the greatest number of hundredths that you can. So when I decompose 15 tenths, that is the same thing as 150 hundredths, and I still have my 7 hundredths, so that would be 157 hundredths. So these three ways that we have named this number, 1 and 57 hundredths, they're all equivalent or equal. So now I'm going to look to round to the nearest tenth. So I'm going to look and choose which of these best helps me when I'm rounding to the nearest tenth. So it would be this middle one where I use the greatest number of tenths possible, because this shows me that my number is between 15 tenths and 16 tenths. So I'm going to create a vertical number line using this form of 1 and 57 hundredths. So when I make my number line, I know that I have at least 15 tenths. Now, what does 15 tenths look like when I write it in standard form? So 15 tenths would be the same thing as 1 and 5 tenths, or 1.5. Now, what's one greater than 15 tenths? Well, if I add one more tenth, that would give me 16 tenths. So what's 16 tenths equal to in standard form? That would be 1.6. So now I'm looking for my midpoint. What is exactly in the middle of 15 tenths and 16 tenths? That would be 15 tenths and 5 hundredths. So what would 15 tenths 5 hundredths look like? That would look like 1 and 55 tenths. So now I have my number line labeled. I just need to find out where 1 and 57 hundredths lies on my number line. So I'm going to look at my midpoint, and I see that I have 15 tenths 5 hundredths, or 1.55. And the number I'm rounding to the nearest tenth is 1.57. So if I look and compare, I have 1 1 in both, 5 tenths in both. Then I have 7 tenths in 1 and 57 hundredths, or 7 hundredths, I'm sorry, in 1 and 57 hundredths. And here I have 5 hundredths. So this number is just a little bit bigger than our midpoint. So our number would be somewhere around here. Now, since it is either on the midpoint or above, it's going to round up to 16 tenths, or 1.6. So when I round that number up, I would get 1.6. 6 or 16 tenths.